Hey everybody, it's Micah, or Where's My Chicken? And this is the third video or episode in the apologetics series. And today we're going to be talking about the design argument for God. Last video, it was the cosmological argument about sort of the philosophical groundwork for uh, belief in God being reasonable. Um, something exists, and therefore we have to explain why that something exists, why the universe exists. And I present the cosmological argument that God is the best answer to that question of existence. And this sort of overlaps with that argument, but it's not the same. Um, and if you're new to this channel, here we talk about theology and apologetics and just things about the Bible. Eventually, we'll hopefully be doing like actual sort of like Bible studies because I like doing that type of stuff. But we also will look at the culture and see how to act and react in the culture, as well as just some other things that I think are, um, you know, serve a purpose. And, sometimes we'll just do different things, just sometimes just to do fun stuff. Not that I don't think this is fun, because I am sort of a theology apologetics geek, you could say. There's quite a lot of those, actually. So it's good to know I'm not the only one. But anyway, today is on the design argument. And to sort of go ahead and give sort of an idea of where this is going, let's say, for example, you're walking through the woods, and on the path in the woods, you find a watch in the woods. Um, when you saw this watch, maybe you picked it up and maybe you looked around and you looked at it. Would you assume, or would you gather from the watch that it appeared there and came together randomly? What I mean by that is the metal, the gears, the springs, the hands, that randomly over time, they just sort of came together and poof, there was the watch. You probably wouldn't think that. You'd probably think that it was made with a purpose and a plan because the watch betrays that it's been designed. And may I just say, the wrist on which the watch sits is much more complicated than the watch. Just put that out there. Nature on a small and large scale. So, you have microbiology and particle physics on one end. You've got astronomy and astrophysics on the other end. There is an amount of precision and intentionality when we look at all these things, whether it be, small particles or planets. And this leads to the idea that there is an intelligent mind behind all of it. Think of it sort of as fingerprints are the product of touching something. Purpose is the product of a mind. So it's not a product of chance. Something can't just happen by chance and be purposeful because it was, in effect, an accident. There would be no purpose behind it. In the evidence of God that I presented in the last video on the expanding universe, a scientist by the name of Merritt Stanley Congdon says this, and I can't remember. I'm pretty sure it was in a article, but it's on the article. It's in the part of the lesson of the rose bush, and he's talking about what we learned from rose bushes. And he says, there are no facts yet wrested from the intriguing mysteries of this strange onrushing cosmos, which can in any degree disprove the existence and intelligent activities of an unconditioned personal God. On the contrary, when as careful scientists we analyze and synthesize the data of the natural world, even by observing only the phenomena of the operations of that unseen being who cannot be found by mere scientific seeking, but who can and did manifest himself in human form, for science is indeed watching God work. And that's his quote from, it may be a book, it may be an article, I don't know, I have to check up on that. But that was a scientist that did say that. The history of this argument, or let me first you tell you where the name comes from. So the design argument is also known as the teleological argument, and it comes from the Greek word telos, that means purpose or ultimate end. Teleology is the study of things, purpose, or design, and this predates Christianity. It was used by Plato and Aristotle from their study of the stars. Thomas Aquinas also used this argument as one of his five waves of proving God. But it really comes to force in 1802 when William Paley published Natural Theology. That's his work. That's what it's called. And the idea of sort of the watchmaker and the watch comes from him. The idea that the watch betrays design and purpose, and he basically takes the watch on a small scale and opens up on a large scale and says there must have been design, there must have been purpose from what we see. This argument more recently is called the intelligent design argument, and it's used by people like Michael Behe and Philip Johnson, William Dembski, and Hugh Ross. Now, Hugh Ross, and probably all these guys, are old Earth creationists. I saw somebody on the last video, or it may have been on the first video I made in the apologetics series, say that the first chapter in Genesis is scientifically inaccurate. And I would just say that there is a variety of interpretations on the literal, I don't want to say literalness, because in a sense everybody takes it literally, but that's the best word I know, the literalness of how to understand Genesis 1. And Hugh Ross is someone who does not believe that Genesis 1 is teaching that the earth is just 6,010 years old. He's what you call an old earth creationist. So he ascribes to the creation story. He believes the creation, how God made it, is accurate. He just says that he doesn't think that Genesis chapter 1 gives you a young earth. That's his opinion. So, but again, it comes down to interpretation, because what you see in Scripture and what you see in the natural world are not going to disagree with each other, because at least in Christianity, they're both revelation from God. So what we have in the natural world and in Scripture is data, and data must be interpreted. So I'm going to be honest. I'm unsure on the old Earth young Earth debate as far as Genesis 1 goes. So I would just say that there's a wealth of interpretation, both in the biblical world, but also in the scientific arena. There are scientists who do not think that the earth is as ancient as most scientists do. So I would just like to point that out. There's differences in interpretation of the data, and that's the only thing I'll say about that. That's not really the point of this video, to get into how old is the earth or whatever, because ultimately I don't think it matters that much, either side of the aisle that you fall on. But there's different flavors of this argument, and there's different ways to show design. There are arguments from order, information, purpose, complexity, simplicity, sense, and beauty. We're not going to look at all these, because some of these, while I do hold them as evidence, they're much, much weaker types of evidence. And I'll talk about it maybe a little bit, but not get into that much detail. But the three main arguments of the design argument, or teleological argument, or intelligent design, is the fine-tuning of the universe, which is order as design, DNA, which is order as information, and something called irreducible complexity, which we'll get into that, and that's order as complexity. So first, we will look at the fine-tuning as design, and we'll look at what's called the anthropic principle. So scientists of various education levels and various realms of study, they understand that the universe has precision. There are parameters that were, if they were altered slightly, they would destroy life as we know it. It wouldn't be possible, at least on Earth. And this leads some scientists to believe that the universe is actually designed to accommodate life. And this is called the fine-tuning, or the anthropic principle. And this has two classes of parameters, one for the universe and one for the sun, planet, moon system, so sort of like a galaxy. Hugh Ross, who is again, like I said, an old Earth creationist, he lists 35 parameters in his book called The Creator and the Cosmos. They must each fall within a very narrow range in order to make life possible. And I'm going to list some of these. And some of these, I'm not going to list everything, but some of these include the strong nuclear constant, the weak nuclear force constant, gravitational force constant, electromagnetic force constant, ratio of electromagnetic force constant to gravitational force constant, ratio of electron-proton mass, ratio of protons to electrons, expansion rate of the universe, entropy level of the universe, mass density of the universe, velocity of light, age of the universe, initial uniformity of radiation, fine structure constant, average distance between stars. So these are all things that, at least according to Hugh Ross, the way they are make life possible, and if they were off just by a little bit, life would not work. So what would happen if they were off by a little bit? Well, for example, if the expansion rate of the universe was faster than 1 part in 10 to the fifth, wow, I can't even say that number. I'm totally blanking. But 10 to the power of 55, I'll say that. Or if it was slower than 10 to the power of 55, life would not be possible because of the dependency of galaxies and stars and planets, because these are all dependent on each other to work. Precision points, this precision, so remember I said 10 to the 55th, that's how you say it. Okay, figured out how to say it. 10 to the 55th, if it was faster than 10 to the 55th or slower than 10 to the 55th, life would not be possible because of the dependency that galaxy, stars, and planets have with one another, is the best way to put it. And this precision, it points to an intelligent mind, a designer, and all, as well as a purpose. Again, that's the argument. Now, the second set of parameters has 66 parameters. So the first one was the universe at large. This is the sun, planet, moon system. And it has 66 parameters, and I'm just going to mention a few of them. If the axial tilt of the Earth were greater or lesser than it is, the surface temperature would be too harsh to support life. If the distance of the Earth from the sun were greater, the Earth would be too cool for a stable water cycle, but if the distance were less, the Earth would be too warm for a stable water cycle. If the Earth's crust were thicker, too much oxygen would be transferred for the atmosphere to the crust, but if the crust were thinner, there would be too much volcanic and tectonic activity. If the gravitational interaction with the moon were greater, the tidal effects on the oceans, atmosphere, and rotational period would be too severe. But if it were any less, then the Earth's orbit obliquity would change too much, causing climatic instabilities. If the gravity on the surface of the Earth were stronger, the atmosphere would retain too much ammonia and methane, which is poisonous, but if the gravity were less, the atmosphere would lose too much water. If the length of a day were greater, the temperature difference would be too great to sustain life, But if the day were shorter, the atmosphere wind velocities would be too great to survive. And again, these change just slightly and life becomes impossible. Now, of course, this is all named the anthropic principle. And, anthropos, man. Is this sort of like egocentric? Are we sort of saying we're so awesome, we're so great, we're so special because we've just noticed that life seems to be designed, or the universe seems to be designed in such a way that makes life possible. So the question, because we need these parameters for life, does that mean that the universe was made with us in mind? And then you get into, well, what if there's life elsewhere on other planets in distant galaxies? Well, that's possible, but there is no evidence of life elsewhere. And as well, if there wasn't, or if there was, it wouldn't change anything about being a human being, or it wouldn't change anything about the truthfulness of Christianity or anything like that. So again, that's, to me, life on other planets is just that. It would just be a fact, and that would be it. If primitive life was found on, let's say, Mars, for example, and let's say it was possible that life on Earth came from Mars, which it didn't, but let's just say that was a possibility, it still wouldn't answer the origin of man, where man came from. It would just take us a step further back. It's also possible that if we do find life on Mars, that the life on Mars came from the Earth. Maybe from, a meteor carrying debris or something, and it hit, and, the life was there. So, yeah, we shouldn't, some of these, we get into sort of conjectural territory when we're talking about, aliens and things like that. Now, I'm not against the possibility of there being aliens. I'm totally open to it. I'm just saying I don't know. And scientifically speaking, there's no evidence that there is life on other planets. That's all I'm saying. And again, if there was, it wouldn't change mankind's need for salvation. So it's just not a big deal, I don't think. Now, if what I say is true, that Earth and life on Earth seems to be unique, does that mean that we shouldn't do the whole space exploration thing? And I would say no. It's fine if we explore space, because the technology developed to accommodate some of these missions has actually improved the life of man. Spin-off technology from the space shuttle, it actually contributed to the development of the artificial heart, the in-ear thermometer, prosthetic material, and auto-tracking systems. So that's pretty cool. And the technology from the Apollo missions contributed to CT scans and MRIs, kidney dialysis, cordless power tools, the insulation of cars and trucks, and the blow molding that was used to make spacesuits was adapted to make athletic shoes. So, no, I'm not against space exploration at all, because it actually has benefited mankind as a whole because of it. So now we're going to look at information as design, and we're going to look at the information theory and DNA. So to kind of explain this, there are different kinds of order. And some order, it at least seems to be from chance and random factors, but some cannot be explained but by intelligent design. So there's specified order, and this is just a string of repeating information. This is naturally occurring, like crystals, nylons, or snowflakes, or something like that. Then there are unspecified complexities. These are non-repetitive and random, and again, they're naturally occurring, uh, sort of like a howling wind or a rock. Then there are specified complexities. These are non-repetitive and non-random, and they're not naturally occurring. And examples would be like music or a statue. A specified complexity is if it is contingent. William Dembski in Intelligent Design says contingency is the chief characteristic of information. To kind of go deeper into this, a rock shape is determined by the laws of nature. There are no other possibilities for its shape. But a statue could be any shape. It is not determined, it's what we call contingent. And for example, let's just take a book, let's say 1984 by George Orwell. And you open the book, and the question I'm asking is there any information on the page? And the answer is no. There are squiggles of ink. They're specifically ordered, but it's squiggles of ink. And you could have knowledge about printing and paper and the chemistry of ink, but you could still not know what it said. If information was a property of the page, it would impose itself into our minds whenever we looked at the page. So kind of think about that. So what is information? Information is communication between minds. And for minds to communicate, there must be a common language. And the language must exist and be understood prior to any ability to communicate. The language of a written music piece, it must exist before the playing of it and also the writing of it. Now, you could say that the music may exist in the composer's head, but it can't be communicated without the convention of notation. Every language is a set of tokens and a set of conventions for the use of those tokens. A token, what a token is it stands in for something intangible. And for an example of this, think about the number 1. So think about, you write on a page 1. It's not an actual number, but a token representing the number, which is non-physical. 1 is non-physical. So there are no letters on a page. They're just the tokens representing the letters. And because letters and numbers are non-physical entities, they have no location appearance. So the letter A, has certain usages, and that connected to other tokens make words. Then those connected, to make sentences. But the rules of language were established before we could use them to communicate. And to kind of give this more force, let's give an example. If a bowl of soup, let's say you're eating, I don't know, the SpaghettiOs are the ones that have the different letters, right? So I guess the SpaghettiOs, if you're eating SpaghettiOs, are the SpaghettiOs just O's? I don't know. I have no idea. But whatever you're eating that has the little letters, and it's spelled I love you. Is it communicating to you? No. If you go to the Grand Canyon and you look out on the Grand Canyon and you see something written, Steve was here, and you see that etched out mark in the canyon, it would contain no information. It wouldn't even be English. It would be just squiggles on a rock that resembles the tokens and conventions used in English. Now we get to usually the example given to combat the design argument, which is, let's say there's unlimited number of monkeys with typewriters and they all are typing to type out Hamlet. So the question is, if these monkeys had an unlimited amount of time, could they type out Hamlet? And the answer is no. Even if they typed the exact sequence of the letters as Hamlet, it still wouldn't be Hamlet. It would be a string of letters that resembles Hamlet, but it would have no information. Because there would be no intention to communicate behind the monkey's actions. There's no true use of language going on, so the token would just be empty. And an example of how a scientist makes use of understanding information theory is actually seen in the search for aliens. We already talked about possibility of life on other planets. Well, the things they listen to and what they search for to see if there's alien life out there somewhere is they listen to radio waves and they search for a specifically complex string of information. So specifically complex signals can only come from an intelligent agent wishing to communicate. So they're not looking for randomness. If they find something random, that could just be naturally occurring. They're looking for specific complex order. And DNA is really what gives the design argument its force, in my opinion. It's probably one of the major arguments in favor of God, because DNA is an argument for a design based on information. The DNA contains information. It stores and retrieves information. It corrects any errors when it copies itself. It contains redundant information, so if a gene mutates, it can be turned off and not cause any damage. It overlaps so that it can provide information to more than one protein. Is expressible in mathematical terms. In other words, it's digital. It's digital, like you write a code on a computer. It's kind of like that, and it houses as much information as an average volume of an encyclopedia. But information is not intrinsic to naturally occurring physical objects. So DNA can't be explained by just nature. Nature. It can't be explained that way. Like sound, it is an agent that carries the tokens and conventions used in speech for communication. And DNA is simply an agent housing a set of tokens used to convey and store information that is necessary for the body to develop and function. Before DNA could be useful, there had to be a language established. The genetic code had to exist prior to DNA, and it had to come from outside of the DNA. The information did not emerge from the DNA itself. And the best explanation, I think, for the information found in DNA, So, where was I at? Yeah, so the best explanation for the information found in DNA is that it was imposed on the DNA by an intelligent mind. Now, the primary objection to the design argument using DNA to argue for design, is really just a presupposition to things being a product of random, non-directed forces. In other words, naturalism. But this doesn't explain how the information came to be included in DNA and how the language of the genetic code came to be. So naturalism cannot account for those things. Dembski says, neither algorithms nor natural laws, however, are capable of producing information. That's his quote. Information needs an informer, someone who orders things in a certain way to communicate specific content. So that's the DNA argument. Then the complexity as design, this gets to what we call irreducible complexity. And the argument kind of goes like that there are some things that are as simple as they could be and still function. Biochemist Michael Behe says, quote, an irreducibly complex system cannot be produced directly, that is, by continuously improving the initial function, which continues to work by the same mechanism, by slight successive modifications of a precursor system, because any precursor to an irreducibly complex system that is missing a part is by definition non-functional. In other words, things that are irreducibly complex had to be created. They cannot be explained by evolution, especially if it's the idea of an undirected force or chance. An example of this is a mousetrap. A mousetrap is an irreducibly complex system. And the way you demonstrate that is which part of the mousetrap can be removed and it still be a functioning mousetrap. And the answer is none. Because it didn't start out as a piece of wood and that caught mice, which then mutated to include a spring, which caught more mice, then adapted to include a hammer that caught more. No, mousetraps made of individual components, which apart from the whole mousetrap are useless. If any is subtracted from the whole, the mechanism is useless. There aren't stages of development to get a mousetrap. So that's really the argument, is that if you if you take away anything from this system, the whole thing falls apart. That's the idea. If examples of irreducible complexity are in biology, then macroevolution, specifically as a way to explain the origins of life, is false. Michael Behe, in his book Darwin's Black Box, uses examples of cilium, bacterial flagellum, blood clotting, animal cells, and antibodies to demonstrate this. And though they are basic, they're irreducibly complex. Each of the components are irreducibly complex, and they're useless apart from the whole. So all those things I mentioned, like the cilium, the bacterial flagellum, the blood clotting, animal cells, and antibodies, you take one part out of them, and they're useless. And the example we can talk about is the bacterial flagellum. And what this is like, it's like a whip part of a bacterium that allows it to move. Kind of like an outboard motor, except water is cooled. It has a universal joint. It has gears forward and for reverse. It can reach up to speeds of 100,000 RPMs and can do self-assembly and repair. So it demonstrates an economy of construction and precision that can't be accounted for by evolution. An intelligent designer is a better explanation for things like the bacterial flagellum. Another biological machine to demonstrate irreducible complexity is the human eye. There's over 40 different components, each of which contain a number of subcomponents in the eye. And if any of these fail, the vision is impaired. So the economy of parts and precision portray a designer. And I can anticipate an objection to using the eye as an example of intelligent design by saying that there are a number of different kinds of eyes in nature, and they exhibit a wide variety of complexity. And this is sort of used to defend evolution. But in nature, it's not that we see a series of steps in a chain, but what we see is a variety of irreducibly complex biological machines. So it is different. But let's say, for argument, that the human eye, did evolve as a result of random process. Let's just say that for argument that it did. That would give us an interface with no receiver kind of like a keyboard not being attached to a computer. There's no actual input without the computer, so there's no sight without the brain to receive it. So the eye must connect to the brain somehow. And that brings us to some questions. How does the eye know where the brain is, or what a brain is, or that a brain even exists, or that a brain is required to make the eye useful? How did the eye know that? How did the eye properly wire itself to the brain? Why didn't it connect itself to the nose or the knee? And even if it did connect to the brain properly, how did the eye know how to speak a language that the brain would understand, and vice versa? Because you see, like I was saying before, we need language prior and apart from the existence of the things that will speak the language. And again, an intelligent designer is the best explanation for, I would even say, the human eye, because of how complex it is. I don't think the eye could have been self-directed or self-organized or anything like that. Even Charles Darwin mentioned that the eye, the human eye, makes evolution difficult, a difficult sort of difficult theory to hold on to, and Darwin said that. Now, of course, he went on to believe, because he felt there were other evidences for it that were better than, the objection to the eye. But I would like to say, just a note here, is this argument that I've presented, it does not prove Christianity alone. So it's not a big proof for Christianity or anything like that. But it is consistent with the description of God that's in the Bible. But it's also consistent with the description of God that's in Judaism as well as Islam. However, Eastern religions would be ruled out by an intelligent design argument, if successful. You could not hold to the Eastern religions and believe as well as intelligent design. I would also like to mention that the truth of Christianity doesn't stand or fall on the truth or lack of truth of evolution. If macroevolution was proven to be true, which I don't think it ever will be, but even if it was, it can't be ruled out that God used that as his agent of accomplishing his design. So God would still be required to initiate and direct the process, to create the languages and the codes necessary for the exchange of information, and provide the purpose and design in the biological machines. So again, if evolution were macroevolution in the Darwinian form was proven to be true, it wouldn't change anything about the human nature. We would still be sinners in need of a savior. It wouldn't change anything. I don't think, personally. Although I do think macroevolution should be argued against, because I think it's based on a fundamental misunderstanding of reality, I think. So the conclusion is that these arguments, the cosmological argument and the design argument, and then we'll get to another argument, I don't know, at some point. Or the last argument for the existence of God, I'll do at another time. But these ones that I mentioned already, they demonstrate that naturalism can only account for so much, that at some point explanatory power fails, it falls short. But it's not this failure. It's not the failure of naturalism to explain everything that points to intelligent designer, because that's the God of the gaps theory. Excuse me. That I believe Neil deGrasse Tyson holds to a sort of God of the gaps of, oh well, science can't explain this, therefore you believe God because of that. Well, science may one day explain that, so that'll remove the need for God. I'm not saying that. I'm saying there are positives in favor of intelligent design, like the precision of the universe, the nature of information, and that random and undirected forces cannot account for the complexity of living things. And this leads to a belief in a transcendent, personal, intelligent designer. Again, doesn't prove Christianity true, but it does at least open the door for the idea that there is a designer who had a purpose, had a plan. He's not inside the universe, he's outside, he's above it. So, and again, that would kind of rule out the Eastern religions, because they don't, the Eastern religions don't hold to a transcendent creator. They believe that it is a part, God is a part of the creation, so it wouldn't agree with that. Which, you want to know something interesting though? How many Bible verses have I quoted in these videos? I don't think any. Well, in my first video, I did. I think I did. But in the cosmological argument and this one, the design argument, I haven't quoted the Bible at all. And that's because a common belief is that, belief in God or religion must be the result of indoctrination. You were indoctrinated into it. Your parents made you believe it, or your culture made you believe it. Therefore, that's why you believe what you believe. Which I find funny, because why can't the shoe be on the other foot? If you're an atheist, why can't I just say, well, your parents were, or your culture around you was, and that's why you believe what you believe? Of course, the response may be, well, my parents were an atheist, or my culture that I grew up wasn't atheistic. And again, my response would be, well, I have just as many examples of people who are Christians who their parents were not, and where they lived were not Christian. So that's not really the best argument of sort of, you've got to be indoctrinated to believe in God, because some of these things, true, you got to get into the sciences a little bit, but some of these things, in my opinion, are self-explanatory. They're kind of just obvious. And what I mean by it is, you could have some farmer out in the sticks or whatever who has never read a Bible, he's never touched a Bible, never seen anything religious in his entire life. And he's just out planting, in his garden and working in his field, and kind of just looks up. And maybe it's a sunset, maybe the sun's going down, he's outside, and he just kind of looks at the sunset, kind of looks around him. He sees his field, talks about the rain, and he's like, somebody must have made all this. That's kind of how it is. I would actually argue the other way, because you have people like Richard Dawkins, who, by the way, if you're an atheist because of the work of Richard Dawkins, man, you're on the bottom rung of atheists. There are way better atheists who argue for atheism than Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins would barely pass an introductory course in philosophy or religion or anything like that. By the way, that's just not my opinion. If you look at what Michael Rose, who is an atheist philosopher, say about Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, he says the same thing. He says it's trash. That it's not good. So take that for what it's worth. But anyway, if you look at some of the things Richard Dawkins says, he's a evolutionary biologist, I believe, and he talks about when he looks at biology and the data of biology, he has to constantly remind himself, like a mantra, that it's not designed. It just looks like it is. Okay? So, again, I think the universe creation, if you want to use that term, on the large scale as well as on the small scale, reveals intention, design, and I'm sure, people still argue about that, and they talk about, they have certain ideas of, well, there's things that we don't know what they're for, like the appendix. Like the appendix seems useless, so maybe there's no God because there's no reason for an appendix. I would say, well, actually, no, we don't know what the purpose of the appendix is. But just because I don't know something doesn't mean that it isn't a certain way. My lack of knowledge doesn't determine how something is. It just means I don't know. And it just seems that on a large scale, people just don't know what the appendix is for. There are suggestions, like somebody said it helps the immune system, I heard. Somebody said that it was because our ancestors would eat meat that wasn't cooked all the way, and it helped them digest meat that wasn't cooked. Who knows? Who knows what reason the appendix is for? But just because we don't know doesn't mean there isn't a reason, because there is a reason, I think. But anyway, I kind of got on a ramble there. I didn't mean to do that, but I did. Oh well. So be looking out for the next video. I don't know exactly when I'll be able to put that out, but it'll be on the moral argument for God, which of the three that I have mentioned, or well, two, but that'll be the third one. Of those three, it probably is the strongest, in my opinion. So if you're watching some of these and you're kind of like, I don't know, it kind of looks good, but I don't know, you see some holes in it, fine, because there is a better argument forthcoming for the existence of God. And yeah, I'll try to get that out soon. But yeah. So I hope some of this is helpful. I hope that I'm being able to present it in a way that's easily understood and that's not, on a overly high level, because I'm gonna be honest, my intelligence is, I'm not dumb. I don't consider myself a stupid person or an ignorant person, but it's not genius level or anything. So some of these concepts are sometimes even difficult for me to understand. But I understand it well enough and understand that the information is accurate enough to be able to present it to other people, because all of this stuff, could be fact checked or anything. But so yeah, so watch out for that video. Look at some of the other videos on my channel. Maybe they'll be useful to you. I surely hope so. And I will see y'all next time around, and God bless.